Hi, this is Gilbert S. with the Unnamed Game Co. Here we are with another podcast. I was gonna say a designer podcast, but we've started to invite other people that are outside of the designer sphere. But we're happy to have anybody come onto our podcast to talk games with us. So if you're interested and you want to be on our show, it doesn't matter if you're a newbie. We just want to talk about experiences and your likes and dislikes, and it's just fun to get to know people in our industry. But we are still continuing on with designer podcasting and talking to our fellow designers. So we have in our little interview again today a wonderful designer. So if you want to introduce yourself, feel free.
Hello, my name is Kyle Tam. I am the creator of Moriah, which is, I guess the quick description is it's sad pilgrimage simulator, but what it is, under the long description is you are a group of people who are attempting to ascend the mountain of the gods in order to save the world, which is undergoing a lot of calamities and disasters, which have partly been caused by mankind being terrible and the gods going, that's not okay, and kind of enacting divine, not kind of, but very much enacting divine punishment. So it's a game very much about sacrifice, like what you have to give in order to save the world and whether you would be willing to give it.
Okay. When you say sad pilgrim, would you say sadder than the Oregon Trail, or would you say just about, or sadder than the Oregon Trail, or do you know the Oregon
Let's
Trail?
say, uh, I think it's about that sad, but in a different way, I guess. Like when we talk about pilgrimage, it's very much like I'm Roman Catholic to start with,
Yeah.
and so when you talk about pilgrimage in that context, it's very much like you are going towards a holy site out of faith, out of belief, in many cases, out of desperation. Like for a lot of the pilgrimages I have read about and people I do know who have gone to holy sites, typically to cure the self. If you're sick or you're just feeling unwell or things are going wrong in your life, you have this like belief, which is what's propelling you onwards. And this is a game that I hope conveys that sense of like desperation and belief, but also the love and care and togetherness of a community that buoys and lifts you up. Because I think religion is obviously it's a very complicated thing, and I am no theologian. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert, but one of the things that religion can do well, and really any form of belief, whether it's belief in God or gods or in other people, is the way it kind of brings you together, and it does so to the point where you're willing to give up so much of your time and energy and yourself um, for the sake of others.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense. When I was reading through this game, this is a fairly dark game, and I think you put it in the very beginning. Like, if you're looking for something that's going to be fun and adventurous, and you're gonna, defeat the bad guy, and this is not your game, and it was like, oh, that's a nice warning to put up right in the very beginning. Um, it so
Yeah.
so where did this sort of inspiration to create Moira come from? Like, in Moriah come from? I apologize. Where did this sort of inspiration come from? It's a pretty dark game. I actually probably one of the darker games I've actually read. I don't know if is that common over there in RPG SEA, or is that in Southeast Asia, or is that just something that's I'm not sure about the design sphere that's happening over there, so I'm kind of curious.
I mean, I think the design, like in some ways, it's it's hard to say that it's typical of RPGC because I've seen so many different kinds of games come out of this scene and really come out of anywhere in the world. But one common thread that there is that you you draw a lot on the histories and the cultures that kind of make up the worlds that you come from. So in this case, Moriah was partly inspired by Vocaloid. Uh, there's a very good Vocaloid song, which I'm a big fan of, called Blessed Messiah and the Tower of I. And if you, uh, after this podcast, after listening to this podcast, if you go and you watch that music video or you listen to the song and you read the lyrics, you'll be like, oh, that is basically the plot of the game. Uh, but another part of it comes from my own experiences, certainly with religion, as I just mentioned, faith and belief. Like, the Philippines is a country that is predominantly Roman Catholic. And I've seen so much of the good and the bad that religion does, and so much of what people can do and have done for the sake of their faith in God and their belief in one another, because you can see like the best and worst of humanity, I think, anywhere in the world, but in a country like this one, it you see so much of the contrast between the rich and the poor. There's so much disparity. It's hard to say that there's like a middle class in this country, so to speak. And so you really see a great divide there. Um, so I've drawn partly on that, on like the things that faith can push you to and can draw you to. But part of it has also been inspired by the globally recognized issue of the pandemic and the way that it's really affected people, because at its core, Moriah is ordinary people taking on an extraordinary task that the extraordinary could not or would not accomplish. Like, there's a bit in the beginning, kind of the preamble going into the game, where it talks about how there are so many that try to ascend Mount Moriah. Your heroes, clergy, officials, so many people. Not a single group has managed to make it up the whole way. And you know this because these terrible, terrible things still keep happening. The world is still in peril. And it's very much kind of the crystallization of this feeling that we as a society, and kind of the human race as a whole, have been let down in many ways by the people who should be our frontrunners in protecting us from climate change, from the pandemic, from poverty. Like our government officials and the extremely wealthy and the extremely powerful. There are so many who have used what they have for themselves, or who haven't used the resources that they have to benefit people. And I think it's a game that was born out of frustration, but there's still hope. Even if it is a dark game, it's prefaced, and I think the theme running through it is that it is a game that is still about hope, that even if the road is hard, you can make the ascent. It is possible, it is doable, it is painful, but you can make it.
So is this intended to be kind of an allegory to what we are dealing with in our current world? That, like, the world is kind of falling apart, and it is up to the average person to try to change it, not necessarily the big heroes like, Elon Musk or one of those people out there that are trying to supposedly change the world. Is this kind of an allegory to the current world we're living in, or?
It is an allegory to the current world, but I'm not going to I'm going to say it right now. I'm not going to pretend that ordinary people, like regular people, should be the ones changing things, because that's quite a corporate narrative. Obviously, every little bit helps, but I do want to make clear that there is a certain responsibility that has been lacking um, from people who I think should have stepped up a little more. That being said, it is allegory for the world, but also for your personal journey or the journey of your family. It's it's my what am- I guess it is my hope for the world and for individual people that no matter the trying circumstances you are in, there is hope. Um, Even if the way forward is a difficult way.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's. I was curious as to. I don't really state my opinions very much on things, so I was just curious as to like, is that, when you do draw onto something that's so dark and but has some sort of silver lining of hope, you have to ask, is this sort of like, because there are a lot of games that are coming out that have political statements, either obtusely or like acutely, and some games are just obtusely like, this is a political statement, this is what we're putting forward, and then there's some that are just a little bit more acute about it. And I was just curious as to if there was some sort of like, I have an intent that I would like to share to the world, and that's not a thing that I have issues with that at all. It's always good to know like that's what some people are coming forward with when they're designing. Um,
Yeah,
yeah. Um,
yeah. I was just gonna.
Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think like undeniably for something like game design, or really when you create anything, there it's hard to say that there is apolitical work because your character and your personality really will come out in the things that you create, that you choose to create. Um, and I think part of your personality is kind of your politics, your beliefs, where that comes from. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you cut off there for a second. I wasn't sure. I was like, did we lose you? um,
No worries.
so let's walk through Moriah and let's talk about the game and how one would one's experiences would be if they played such your game. From beginning to end, let's work our way through the book and sort of your document here, and sort of talk
Sure.
about some of the rule sets, and some of your decisions for some of the rule sets. So at the very beginning of Moriah, it does talk about all the stuff you were saying, is that these heroes have tried, everybody's tried. Um, the Moriah is equivalent to like the Mount Olympus of olden mythology. Am I right? It's the idea that the
It
gods are perched on top of a very high mountain.
Yes, but the name itself is actually from the Abrahamic
Mm.
tradition. So Mount Moriah is literally where Isaac was meant to be sacrificed. And that's why the game is called Moriah, because that's where literally there was that choice between choosing to sacrifice Isaac on top of the mountain or not. Yeah, it's Abrahamic tradition because it was Abraham who brought his son Isaac up. I'm just trying to make sure I got the name right. Yes, so it is a bit like Olympus in that sense, but the gods of this setting are not quite a pantheon in the traditional sense. They're not like there's one god in charge of this, one god in charge of that. I think it would be they say gods, but it's easier to think of them, I think, as spirits of the world. They are the embodiment of the natural world. They are thing, and everything is them.
Okay, that makes sense. So okay, so it's less of it's more of a spiritual god, sort of natural god, than sort of like clear defined pantheonic gods. That's my understanding.
Yes.
All right, makes sense. And these gods are mostly like unnamed gods. Am I right in the game? Or you could name them necessarily, but like they're mostly like just sort of the natural force of the world. Am I right? That's how they sort of come off.
Yes, they are the natural force of the world, and you it part of the way that the game starts is that before you have access to any mechanics, one of your group will have to sacrifice themselves, and then they become the game master, so to speak. But in story terms, they become one of the gods of the world, and that's kind of how that secret and that part of the story is revealed to you, that when you die, you become one with the world, you become a god, and you gain access to the knowledge and the emotions shared by the other gods, and you realize this is why we are angry, because I can feel the pain and the suffering of this world, which I am, which we are.
Yeah.
And that's the reason for the retaliation of the god. And that's also um, that is the running theme for the game master, the god player slash players. Whenever a player character retires from the game or is otherwise kind of killed or sacrificed, they join what becomes like a chorus of gods.
Yes. Yeah. I did notice that this was that you had you didn't how do I put it? You had a running narrative throughout the entire book or your entire book, and that the conceptually what you decide what instead of like breaking the narrative away from the game explanation components, you just tied all of it in together. I think you put down like you described the dice in as stones as part of the story and part of like even how the GM becomes the GM is part of the story. There isn't like a defined like this is the GM section and then you read the GM section and these are the player creation sections and it's a very unique thing. I hadn't read a book like that where it really does just it's telling a story from the very beginning to the end, and all the gameplay is just sort of like is smoothly or sort of is sort of inducted into that sort of narrative thread, so that it doesn't feel like it's necessarily there's the game part and then there's the story part. It's all part of the same sort of through line, which is really interesting.
Yeah, so I am probably not the only person in this community who plays a lot of video games. And the reason that I chose this style was because I don't know who wrote the Twitter thread. I will try and find it, but someone had this really interesting Twitter thread about the optimal ways we learn, and that's why sometimes it's really hard to digest rule books for for RPGs because they're written kind of in the style of a textbook, where there's like a lot of forced rote memorization and it's not necessarily that interesting. Whereas the best way that people actually learn um, is in a more like sort of fluid experiential style. Uh, and there's like education studies and such would show that. So I wanted to make it more like a video game tutorial where the things that you do are kind of integrated into the way that the story works. So you've got your like first half hour of a video game, and rather than kind of pulling you away from the game world, the games naturally integrate the way things work into your into your initial journey. And I thought that might make for a better reading experience, but also an easier play experience. Like hopefully it would be that much easier and that more immersive for people to pick up.
Yeah, it's very clever, and I would love to see more designer. I would love to see more books like this, like we don't put the rules of the game as rote. Like we don't put it just as a clean mechanism of discussion, but just as it's part of the story. And I think that's a very unique way of doing it. And I think that would be an awesome trend to see happen moving forward, because it does it creates more of an immersion for the reader, in my opinion, where you sit there and you're reading it and you're not being pulled out of the moment and thinking, oh, okay, so I need to do this. Oh no, I need to, and it's also interesting that you could just read it and play it as you're reading it. A lot of times you have to have GMs who have to do like significant preparation, and you could kind of just, you know, pick this up and kind of follow along on your first go through with the group, which is really nice, and it keeps the moment and the narrative and everything sort of tied in together. um, Before we move on to the dice component part of this game, let's talk about character creation. I think you have one of the more narrative focused character creations. So
Yeah, so in terms of character creation, uh, this section I drew a lot of inspiration from the way that Ten Candles and Fiasco does it.
yeah.
So, in Ten Candles and Fiasco, it's a bit pass around. So you are writing out parts of a story and you're passing it to other people. And in this way, you're kind of collaboratively creating characters.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this is I, I, I don't know if people want to hear this, but these rules are optional. I can't control what you do at your table. You don't have to do things this way. But I like having that element of sometimes parts of character creation are out of your hands. And I say this as somebody who very lovingly writes like 10 pages of backstory for every character I create because I'm so into making my own characters. But for a game like this, which is about like kind of being subject to the will of the gods and fighting against that, it felt more apt to have character elements such as your occupation or your history, um, your relationships with other people, to be things that are not necessarily defined by you, but by those around you. Because we can't always choose where we end up, or who we associate with, or what we become. Like, sometimes you kind of stumble into things, and that's just how life is, and you have to try and make the most of it. And I think it works with this style of game because um, it's not meant to be like a super dedicated long campaign, unless you really want to do it that way. But that might be a bit much. Um, but it was meant for like one, maybe two shot play. So you don't have to grow so attached to the character. And this way, because you don't have to do so much prep for it, you can kind of take your time to feel out what the character is like during session, as opposed to feeling a little bit chained by what you created.
Interesting. Yeah, like it's Fiasco and Ten Candles are actually two of my favorite games. That's I actually based one of my first games off of my first major game that we released off of originally from the Ten Candles. Started off as a Ten Candles hack, so yeah. So and then it devolved and turned into something completely different. But I do like those styles of character creation where it's like a word or a memory or something defines your character more so than necessarily a bunch of like dots on a character sheet. You know, I think that's something that, or numbers on a character sheet, like, oh, I'm all these numbers, and I'm like, well, I think like the heart of like, I think that's a way to make characters, but I also do like games that have like, oh, you're this sentence, and like, oh, that tells me a lot about who I am. You know, Fate does it with certain, you know, with their with portions of their game control. So they have the numbering systems, but then they also have ways to create, I think it was boons or whatever they call them. Yeah, it's an interesting So you create memories and ties. Am I correct? Is that how we're doing it in this game?
Yes. So you memories and tides. Memories are interesting in that you can also sacrifice them. They're two. Well, there are several things you can sacrifice. So you can sacrifice parts of your body in order to temporarily upgrade your dice. That's one of the mechanics of the game. If you're not familiar, you start off with a D4, but you can temporarily upgrade the die that you roll by cutting off parts of your body, and it'll upgrade you from a D4 to a D6 to a D8, so on and so forth. And so you can sacrifice those, but you can also sacrifice memories that you create in the beginning, um, in order to just add numbers. Like if you're like one or two short, maybe you give up a memory you created in the beginning of your first birthday or your wedding. And these are terribly sad things to lose. You've got to cross that out, and you just cannot remember anymore.
And then that doesn't give you a dice bonus increase though. That just gives you a
Like a +1, +2, but sometimes you prefer that as opposed to the die bonus, because for a die bonus you have to re-roll your die,
that
and the dice can be cruel.
yeah, that makes sense. Considering the game mechanics of the system, but I wouldn't. I'd imagine that losing a memory is almost as brutal of a sacrifice as taking off a finger. For me, like, oh, I can't remember the name of my true love. Oh, that's terrible, or something. Oh, my finger. I lose a finger over that. That's. I mean, I don't have a true love, but I can imagine as a character, um, that the two choices. One would be like, I'll take the finger.
Yeah, I think it's very much just a thing of like, what is important to you?
Yeah.
What matters the most to you? What are you willing to give up? And it's just like, weighing out the pros and cons of it.
So, what happens? So after you create your characters, after you define the village that you live in, and that you're climbing Moriah, you run into a number of challenges, and a number of those challenges combined together create a road,
Yes.
and at the end of that road you'll run into a respite, which is a break point. Am I correct so far on how this works?
So it's not the end of the road. You'll have several respites along the way. Think of these as in-character breaks. So I played a lot of what you call just emotionally intense games. Like I used to play a lot of Wraith the Oblivion, and oh my god, that game it it just bums you out as a game. It just bums you the hell out. Like you are a ghost, and the afterlife sucks, and you're doing that for hours. Like it's a very emotionally fulfilling game, but oh my god, it's a lot. Which is why I implemented the respites here. A respite is a non-die, not a challenge. It's an in-character break because there are prompts for you as a group to just have character moments and talk about things. Maybe you talk about, you know, the friends who have died since your last respite. Maybe you talk about the things that you miss from home. Maybe you talk about, the last good meal that you ate. Things like that. It's just something to take your mind off the emotional turmoil that is the challenge of the rest of the road. And I think it's something that, um, beyond just having safety tools, which are extremely crucial and vital, and I think it is important to do that. When you deal with like a really heavy situation in a game, or you have a really tense game, sometimes your safety tool might be kind of too much. And sometimes you want to be able to de escalate from this situation. Um, but it's hard to find a natural transition point. So these are meant to be a natural transition point so that players can decompress in character without necessarily having to break away from the game.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like the idea of respites. I mean, I've written them myself into games, but not to the level of like I wrote it as a respite. Like I think a lot of like people will use a downtime, or they'll call it a downtime or something, to sort of let the characters have some RP moments, and I think the calling it a respite is a really good thing, because I mean, interesting thing, because yeah, it does become pretty. When you're doing heavy games, the emotional labor. Some players just don't recognize how much like a game can take out of them because like I've seen get very intense and without any sort of breaks, and at the end you're just like you feel jittery or shaky, and I think those respites are really nice to have, especially built into a game, especially built into the game mechanic, which is really cool. Uh,
Yeah, but seriously, if you are a player and you of anything, whether it's RPG or like a LARP, don't be afraid to recognize when things are getting too much for you. Like I did a LARP, and I think I was getting too into it slash too in character because I started crying, and then afterwards I was like, oh, okay, I need a break now. We're going to take a lunchtime, and I'm just going to chill the hell out.
yeah, I was recently a couple weeks ago in a campaign. I'm still in the Vampire Masquerade campaign, and there was a very intense moment in the game where the players confronted my character in the game for some actions I committed, and it was getting very intense. And there's a point in the middle of all of this. I'm a theater person, so I can compartmentalize pretty well, but there's a point in the middle of all of it where I had to just go, is everybody okay? I just need everyone to say they're good before we keep going, because this is getting pretty intense. And I guess it flared off anxiety attacks for some people later that night, but it's like you just don't realize, like some people don't recognize, and I think it's a good thing to recognize that you need to stop, or GMs need to have recognition that like heavy things need stop points or breathing moments to let players sort of like recover, because we do get so into our characters that we forget that they're that that they're not us, which can be hard for some people, because we get so attached.
Yeah, totally. Like as people, we're it's hard. It's hard because you're really feeling it. But now that I'm older, I'm like, oh my god, you need to take breaks. You need to take care of your mental health.
Yeah, 100%. And do you think that's not only something that like the player should recognize, but the GM should recognize, but it's also nice that the game designer in the game itself is recognizing, like, I understand my game is gonna be emotionally taxing, so, um, yeah, here's the breaks. You have to take them, not have to, but like if you're one of the people who are gonna, you don't have to follow rules. But honestly, like I've heard this a lot from designers. You don't have to follow the rules, but how many people really do? Like, I mean, there's house ruling, but I don't think there's very many people that break away from the rules. They're like, okay, these are the rules. We're just gonna follow them, unless they really hate them. But I don't know very many people that do that, personally.
Yeah, I think at the very least, people tend to stick to the structures of a game. I think. I don't know. Sometimes people go off the wall. You kind of have to expect, like, people do as they please. All you can do is ride the current.
Yeah.
Like, I don't agree with super tightly controlled GMing, but that's because I play very fast and loose. And I run games very fast and loose.
I
Shout out to my players.
I'm the same way as a GM. Um, I've also learned how to be sort of a back what do you call it, backseat GM. Not really a backseat. I hate that term, but like I'll try to help support and the GM as much as I possibly can by like saying yes to some of their initiatives, and because it can be hard as a GM, and so like I try to be very supportive of GMs. But I don't really like try to hijack anything myself. But I've become a very good number two in a game, which is nice because GMs appreciate that there's someone who's willing to at least try. But I don't try to like take away from anyone else's experience. So I'll be like, okay, if that's what the group wants, I'll go with it. But yeah, I'm kind of a fast and loose person myself, like very fast. Yeah, my game design partner and I've had debates because Caradwin is very much I prepare everything, and I am a very much I will show up and just figure it out. Somehow we make a game design company.
I think it's important just to have that contrast so that one of you can like tell the other, no, you're going too hard on this. Don't do it.
Yeah, that's usually Caradwin. That's usually Caradwin telling me, you should chill out. Cool. But yeah, the difference between people out there who are listening to this, the 3 or 4 people listening to our podcast right now, if you'll be able to listen to Caradwin's world building podcast coming out, and that's super well prepared. It's got PowerPoints, it's got all this sort of stuff, and it's got like a very like well thought out through line, and I just show up and I start recording. So major differences. But I hope people will like that, and stay tuned. It'll be coming out probably in May. Anyways, back to Moriah. Let's talk about the dice system, because there's the you have challenge ratings, and that was the one portion of this game that I was a little bit like I didn't understand it, because you have like challenge plus the omega, which represents the number of pilgrims, and I didn't
Yeah.
understand how the mathematical portion, it wasn't as clear to me, and I kind of read it 2 or 3 times. So I was kind of like, okay, so how do I determine the numbers I'm rolling? Is it group rolling? Am I rolling with multiple people and we're combining our totals?
It can be. So it really depends. Um, it depends on you guys. You can choose to pool your totals together if you want, or you can choose not to. Um, Mathematically speaking, if you want to optimize, you will be pooling together your rolls every single time. Um, but this is not Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not asking you to do real math. That is to say, the challenge rating, um, as Gilbert's pointed out, is a number plus something next to ohm. So when you have your number plus the whatever ohm, it's your number plus X times ohm. So for example, you have 10 plus 2 ohm. That's 10 plus 2 times ohm. Ohm being the number of living people still in your party. That's the number of remaining pilgrims. So this is a number that scales, and the more people that die, the lower that number is, just to account for the fact that it's going to be harder for you the less of you there are.
Yeah, that's makes sense. Well, is it considered harder or is it considered easier? I mean, depending on where the variable math would sort of take up. Because if the average is higher than normal, mathematically speaking, then it could. I'm bringing math here. But mathematically speaking, if the average die, because the average on a die is usually the middle number plus 0.5, so like 3.5, 4.5, etc., etc. Um, Sorry, my brain malfunctioned there for a second.
No.
It's too early for math. No, but like the question is, would it necessarily be easier with less people, harder with less people? Because I imagine that like the more people you have, the potential lower average. The potential is that you'll end up with lower averages.
it's meant to make it more fair if there's lower people. It was never about making it easier or harder, only to make it fair.
Okay.
Originally, it used flat numbers, but the flat numbers were going to be straight up impossible at a lower group count when people sacrifice themselves going up and up. So, if or when people sacrifice themselves. So, the reason for the variable at the end of each is just to level the playing field out. That being said, this game, the emphasis on this game was not balance for the sake of like easy or hard. And there's ample mechanics in the game that allow you kind of second and third chances, which allow you re-rolls or like plus ones, plus twos on your dice, or even automatic successes if you choose to have one member of the party sacrifice themselves.
Okay.
Like, yeah. I don't want this game to be impossible.
No,
It's a possible game.
It does sound possible. It does sound hard, which is nice to see that there's a challenge to it. So let me walk through and see if this is like, because part of what we do sometimes on this in this little interview is to use the system a little bit to try to like so we better understand from the mechanics point of view. Let's assume you and I are playing. I mean, we don't have to make characters or anything like that. But assume we're going up you and I are going up Moira. We have a imaginary GM here, and they throw the first challenge at us, which is we are faced. Well, the second challenge, because technically the first challenge is the gate.
Yeah.
The second challenge is the monkeys or a sort of monkey-like creature is throwing rocks down the mountain towards our direction, creating sort of rock slides that are making it impossible to sort of move forward. Assumingly, the GM says, okay, that's about a challenge 5 plus 2 omega. Mathematically, that would be a total of 9. So we would just need to roll between the two of us 9.
Yes, but that's already quite difficult because assuming that's two of us and we didn't have anybody that came with us.
Okay.
We both have D4s. The maximum we can roll is an 8.
To start the game, yes, we start with D4s because that's the first dice. After the first sacrifice, you're given a D4. The second sacrifice moves you to D6. Third goes to D8, yes. So forth and so on, all the way up to D100. I think that was very clever what you called each of the dice, like how you described each of the dice in the game. By the way, I thought that was a really cool thing.
Okay.
If for those who are interested to know what those are, you should totally buy this game when it comes out. So then, or support the creator when it comes out. So then you can read what it all says because it's amazing. It's well written. It's very, very well written for those who are listening. It's a dark game, is what I told. I was reading this I was reading this at night, and I was like going, this is really dark. I might have some sad dreams tonight. I didn't. I ended up just having dreams about spiders for some reason.
I don't think I wrote spiders in.
I know, that's the reason I didn't. I don't think I was affected by it. I just had dreams about spiders. And more funny dreams than anything. I don't know how spiders could be funny, but I think I was laughing in my dream. Dreams are weird.
They are. Dreams are very weird.
So that would be considered. So we'd probably want to scale that down to 3, plus omega.
You can do that. Like, this is a game where I recommend having your, like, 3 to 5 players. The expected player count is 3 to 5 players, but typically you'll want to start with, that's 3 to 5, not including the person you kill off at the start. So technically 4 to 6. Just because at 2, it will be a little bit hard if you're just starting on the D4 and you have to start chopping off bits of yourself already.
Yeah. the
That being said, there are a lot of bits on the human body. You've got 10 fingers, 10 toes, a bunch of teeth.
Oh yeah, there's a but I almost completely forgot the teeth thing.
You have to, I mean, you got 32 teeth. It will be terrible to pull them out, but you got 32 of them.
And on average, how many challenges do you expect there to be in a single session?
So the beginner, let me see. Yeah. So I have 10 challenges for the road less traveled, which is the beginner one. Having seen the roads that have been written up, it'll be about 20 to 25. I didn't write this, but I had an idea for later down the line releasing supplements of a 40 challenge road, but that's just like terrible. That's like, oh my god.
And then we would in essence be playing multiple roads, right? Is that my understanding? Like you'd, or do you just play the one road per session? I'm just kind of curious as
You
to
can
how.
play just the one.
Okay. Um.
My initial idea was that you just play one road per session, or depending on how much roleplay you get done, you can stretch it out over two or more. It really depends on the nature of your group, um, how kind of deeply they want to roleplay things out. Because at the end of the day, the game is mostly there to help push you into this character into your character mindsets and to discuss you know why are you guys doing this, what does this mean to you, um, what keeps you on this road, and how do you deal with what is happening on this road and in the world around you.
Okay, that makes sense. Um. So your plan is to release more sort of road options for people that want to, because it seems like that this is a lot of like replayability, which is really cool. It's a pretty open system. So is that the
Yes.
cool?
So the full book will have the initial road less traveled plus five more roads. So there will be two which I've written, two written by guest authors, and one with some backer submitted challenges and respites.
Have you already kickstarted this, or has it already gone
This
through?
was itch funded. I cannot use Kickstarter because I'm in the Philippines. But this was itch funded during Z month. And thanks to the wonderful generosity of people, I um, I have my wonderful guest designers on board. I have my layout designer, and we're getting some really nice art, some of which is already in the ash can. I think if it uploaded properly. No, the ash can doesn't have the art, but there is some really nice art that's going to be in this book, and it's gonna. I've seen the previews. It's a really nice looking book already. I'm so excited
Is
to get it out there.
Are you planning to run sort of an AP for this in the future? Is that something you're going to do, or plan to do, or interest to do?
So I've been talking with a couple of people about running an AP for this. Um, I would like other people to run it as well. Like, don't feel like you need to have me around for this. I'm excited to see what other people come up with and how they play it. Um, Although I realize this is not super easy to bring to the table. It's like, hey guys, who wants to be bummed out this evening? Ooh,
That's that
Marcel.
we had that with our game this night and then. We had that too. Like our game this night and then is not like a happy game. It's a game about goodbyes, and so we had like trying to get people to jump into a game like that. It's like, well, this game is about endings, and it's all like no matter what you do, we eventually run out of time, and we have to say goodbye, and everything that we knew is gonna have to end. Uh, you look at someone going, so it's a bummer game, and I'm just like, yeah, but it's cathartic. It's great. No, no, nobody. Okay, so we'll play Dungeons and Dragons. Got it.
Oh,
um,
yeah.
well, I mean, but you have to make the games you love, and that's what we I've always firmly believed in is that if you love the game, just make it. It doesn't matter if it's commercial or it's gonna make get a. There's gonna be someone who's gonna love your game because there's everybody has a different taste, and there's going to be different people for different things, and if you don't put it out there, you never know. And so I always tell designers, like, don't try to make the game that's going to sell or make you money. Just make the game that you like, and then at the end of the day, that's what you hope that you'll have like-minded people like it too. Otherwise, if you really just want to make something that's going to make money, then just make adventures for Dungeons and Dragons or for Pathfinder or whoever's out there, because that's a better way to make money than trying to release your own games, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. But it is, I think, a privilege to be able to create things for one's own passion as opposed to like creating things that sell. Um, I think I do realize I'm very fortunate in that I can make weird shit like this, um, as opposed to kind of feeling pressure to create for larger games. There's no shame in that. It's just not my thing.
Yeah, no, and I'm not trying to say like there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying like there is easier ways. There's better ways if the focus to try to make some money, not necessarily to create games, then like there are easier ways to do that in the industry, than trying to release your own game, especially something that's going to be weird or strange or out there. Um, and it's not and I hope if you that's what you want to do someday and you want to make that, then there are a lot of like little tiny publishers that would be down to help you produce it. So that's also something you want to do. Like there are, just talk to different producers out there, because public little groups are there's still little indie presses that will publish if you come talk to them, and you just need to find them and talk, and not be and I know it can be a little daunting to say, hey, would you be interested in this game? I mean, the worst they'll say is no, but the least that there are many out there. There's many small presses out there, including our own, that would be happy to try to produce a game on behalf of people if they can. Um, maybe I should eventually invite some of those people onto our show. Um, but yeah. So before we sort of walk out of here, because we're getting near the end of our show, let's talk. I just would love to know more about you as a person. Like, is there where does your game philosophy sort of like? We always ask that on the show. Like, where do you come from in terms of your game experiences? Are you like some people have come on and say like I've come more from this world of games, or I come from this place. So I should have asked that at the very beginning, but it's kind of something that we like. Where does your philosophies, where's your design paradigm come from? Where are you inspired by, etc., etc.? I know you have talked about some of your background, but like I think Will a couple weeks ago has said they came from Gauntlet. I don't have a set place, so that's like my game systems are all over the place. Um, but yeah, it's always interesting to know like where like who are you as a designer, you know?
So, my game design journey started with uh, like the really, I want to say kind of the weird, a little bit niche things. Like, okay, so it starts with when I was a teenager, I got gifted a copy of Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition for my birthday, but none of my friends wanted to play, so I never played Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. I didn't start playing RPGs properly until I got to college and joined the like university's sci-fi society, and I played something called Lacuna, which is like this weirdly, I don't know if other people have heard of it. It's this like strange little game about delving into people's psyches. In hindsight, it's like the funky non-Japanese RPG version of like a Persona 4. But I started there, and then I played a lot of the kind of White Wolf, uh, no, Break the Oblivion, Vampire the Masquerade, and then I ended up liking the sort of what do you call it? The New World of Darkness games. Like, in particular, Changeling the Lost, still one of my favorite things that I've ever read, that I've ever run. Uh, but the first game that I GM'd, and the game that I still love to GM, is Paranoia. And that's a game that I think a lot of my design philosophy for GMs draws on, because it's something that really encourages GM voice and creativity. And it's like, don't fuss about the rules. It is fine. Just enjoy it. Just go with the flow of it. Um, the important thing is, maintaining mood. And that's something that's really carried over into the way I design games for people. It's particularly the I don't like this idea of the game master being uh, not a player. Like, they're not just a facilitator. They're not just the background. They're not just a manager here. They are another person at the table with equal say, equal voice. And that's something I wanted to bring into Moriah, and that's why you kind of have the chorus of voices, which actually, belatedly, that is not original to me. That's pulled from the very excellent Lovecraft-esque. I deliberately sought it out so I could kind of remix and borrow that mechanic for Moriah. It's a really good game. You should also check it out. But yeah, so I think my game design philosophy comes a lot from these moody, atmospheric games, which are all about emotions and just drawing out the best and worst of your emotions in an in-character way. So exploring your feelings about life, about reality, about the world that you live in, and the values that you hold. So that's something that I took into Moriah. And I think you will see in most, not all, but most of my other games, that there's this kind of exploration of who are you as people, and how can we safely explore that by being other people.
That makes a lot of sense. That's interesting. I don't really know a lot about Paranoia. Would you mind talking a little bit more about what the game is about? Because, there's not one of the more, it is a pretty known game, but it's not like one of the big known games out there. And it's good to talk about games that some people may not have heard about on this chat.
Yeah, it is a shit. More people should play it. I think it's great. It has so many additions. But Paranoia is a game. It's mostly a comedy game. You can play it as a serious game. I have never done that. I wouldn't know the first thing about running it. Don't ask me. But Paranoia is a game set in the underground Alpha Complex, which was created out of fear of nuclear war on the surface. So now the remains of humanity live underground in this Alpha Complex, which is overseen by a program called Friend Computer, which glitches out every so often and is an AI, but has been messed with and tinkered around with so many times over the years that it can turn on a dime just like that. It's a moody computer, which is the worst kind of computer. You do not want, I already hate having a moody printer. So the fact that this entire complex is run by this singular artificial intelligence that can just turn at the drop of a hat on you, and is governed by these strange archaic rules, it's just a recipe for disaster. And you play troubleshooters who are clones, and you've recently been promoted from the worst clearance level to a slightly less worse clearance level, and you are trying to do odd jobs for the sake of Friend Computer. So it could be something as complicated as investigating disturbance to something as simple as please change a light bulb over there. And the fun in Paranoia is just, um, it's a very silly game, and the core concepts are, for a computer, you're an alpha complex, you're troubleshooting, and being a communist is illegal, being part of a secret organization is illegal, being a mutant unregistered is illegal, and like 1 billion other rules are illegal, and everybody is secretly part of an organization, everybody is secretly a mutant, and nothing ever goes the way that you want it to. So it's the way I run it. It is just a very silly but fun game,
I think I
and I
should.
highly recommend.
I think I'll try it.
Yes,
Go
you
ahead.
should. And I think for first-time GMs, I do weirdly really recommend running this over something like Dungeons and Dragons because it's literally illegal for players to say that they know the rules of Paranoia,
Oh, that's
so they
great.
can't get mad at you. Yes,
That's so great.
it's amazing.
Yeah, but knowing you come from Paranoia and then knowing you come from White Wolf, does say a lot about your design constructs because you're like, oh, yeah. As soon as you say someone's more of a White Wolf, you're like, oh, so we're gonna have deep emotion. Well, if you're from the World of Darkness side of White Wolf, because if you're from the Exalted or Scion side of White Wolf, your characters are all going to be triumphantly larger than life anime characters. But if you're on the White Wolf, on the World of Darkness side, you're going to have more deep emotion. um,
Yeah, it's kind of in the name. They tell you like World of Darkness. You're like,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's always interesting to like, and this is what I love to ask about because like you can kind of see where some designers come from based primarily from what what they like, or where what scenes they hang out in, and like, oh yeah, oh totally, I see that, I see that in your design work, um, or at least aspects of it. Like, I'm a board gamer. I actually come from more of the board game world, and so a lot of my games have very deep, like have intricate dice roll systems or like unique strange systems because I like the game component of it. So I do. That's always, it's always fun to talk about. Um, where do we come from as designers? But yeah, going way back, I know that really I totally sidestepped on it, but it does forgot to mention that part about the chorus because a lot of some players might be like, well, after I sacrifice, what happens? I'm just out of the game because that notion is that some games when you die or games that have like death mechanic, you're just sitting there. Like in 10 Candles, that kind of can happen where you decide to let your character just you may decide that, hey, I want to let my character die or whatever, or actually no, that wouldn't be the one, because you don't have to die in that. Well, you do, everyone dies. Our Last Best Hope is a good option where like you could die in Our Last Best Hope, but then like you kind of can be still seen in flashbacks. So but it's nice that you. So how does the chorus work? Like, do they say stuff on the side? Do they continue to? How would you imagine that the chorus, the sort of chorus of God voices, work?
So once you have more than one person who's been sacrificed or otherwise like incapacitated in terms of the game, you choose amongst yourselves who's the like lead voice, who's a primary narrator, and then the rest of the people like come in playing maybe various NPCs, so to speak. They can come in as like a disembodied voice of a god, um, speaking directly, or they can just add extra narration and flavor to the scene, or they can help people kind of relive past memories or create new ones. So it's meant to add to what might be a growing sense of isolation as you go up, um, but also from the God side, this greater like communal understanding, this creation of a shared story. Again, Lovecraft esque, which is a wonderful game where you have a group of people narrating the story of a single witness to Lovecraftian horror, And the way they do it there, and what I've borrowed from Moriah, is that you have a primary narrator for each scene, and then the rest kind of contribute leading details, clues, facts. In this case, what they're contributing is sort of more to the mood, the atmosphere, things to be overcome in terms of description. Because while everything ends up ruled by a single die roll, you can spend as much or as little time as you like during a challenge narrating how one gets from start to end.
That's amazing. So we're at the end of our time here, and I just wanted to say thank you again for coming on our little podcast. It was fun talking about your game. When should we be able to see this out there so that people could, support it and buy it, or if they were not part of the original Itch Fund?
So if you were part of the original Itch Fund, the game is actually, the ashcan of the game is out and available either for purchase or as a community copy. You can just pick it up from my Itch site, and hopefully the full release will be out in May, fingers crossed.
All of the links to the will be down below. Will be down below when this goes live, including your Itch, your Twitter, any other handles you'd like to share with us. We might even include the music video that you recommended at the very beginning of the show. If you want to send that over to me, we'll put that in there. I think you did say a music video or something like that at the very beginning. But yeah, this has been Gilbert S. with the Unnamed Game Co. And this has been... Do you want to say goodbye?
Yeah, and this has been Kyle Tam. Thank you so much for having me.
We do appreciate you, and we will. If you like this video, hit like and subscribe down below. We should be having another. We'll have the next interview out next month from this release. So I hope you all come and take a look at that. Have a good one, everyone.